There's a moment many people feel but can't explain. Everything seems fine. The connection is there. The conversation flows. Nothing is wrong. And yet, something feels blocked. Not from your side, from theirs. Like an invisible wall just appeared between you. You can still talk, still connect, still exist in the same space. But something deeper stops moving. And no matter how calm you are, how patient you are, how present you are, you can't seem to reach them in the same way anymore. Because what you're feeling is not rejection, it's not disinterest, it's something far quieter. The moment an avoidant nervous system hits an internal barrier, a wall they feel, but rarely know how to explain. The invisible wall doesn't arrive dramatically. There's no clear argument, no obvious shift, no moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. Instead, it appears quietly, almost imperceptibly. One day, the connection feels open. The next day, it feels slightly different. Still there, but less accessible, like something moved just out of reach. This is why so many people struggle to understand it. Because nothing externally seems broken. The avoidant may still respond, still engage, still be present in a surface level way, but something deeper has shifted. Emotional depth becomes harder to access. Conversations feel lighter, more contained, less revealing. It's as if an internal boundary suddenly formed, and that boundary is not directed at you. It's directed at emotional intensity. Because for the avoidant, closeness is not a fixed experience. It is something the nervous system continuously measures. How much vulnerability is present? How much emotional exposure is happening? How much closeness is being sustained? As long as those levels remain within a tolerable range, the avoidant can stay open, connected, engaged. But the moment those levels cross a certain threshold, the system responds, not with conflict, not with explanation, with containment. The wall appears, not physically, psychologically. It creates distance without leaving. It allows interaction without depth. It protects without confrontation. From the outside, this can feel confusing because the avoidant did not disappear. They're still there, still talking, still interacting, but the connection feels limited, restricted, as if something is holding it back. And that something is not a decision. It's a nervous system response, a way of regulating emotional intensity without fully disconnecting, because full disconnection is not always necessary. Sometimes the system just needs to reduce depth, to lower exposure, to create space within the interaction. So it builds a wall, an internal boundary that controls how much of the connection is allowed in and how much is kept out. This is why you can feel close to an avoidant one moment and slightly shut out the next, not because they stopped caring, because their system shifted from openness to protection. Understanding this changes something important, because when people encounter that wall, they often react by trying harder, more effort, more presence, more emotional reach. But the wall is not something you can move from the outside. It was built to regulate internal pressure, and the more pressure the system feels, the stronger the wall becomes. So what feels like a communication problem is actually a regulation strategy, a way for the avoidant to remain present without becoming overwhelmed by closeness. And once you see that clearly, the experience stops feeling like rejection and starts revealing a deeper psychological pattern. The wall doesn't appear randomly. It is triggered quietly, precisely, and often in moments that seem completely normal to you. Because what activates it is not conflict, it's closeness, not loud closeness, subtle closeness, the kind that builds slowly without tension. A deeper conversation, a moment of emotional honesty, a sense of being seen, not judged, not pressured, just seen. And that's where the shift begins. Because for many avoidants, being seen is not only connection, it is exposure. It means something internal is now visible, something they usually manage privately. Emotions, needs, vulnerability. So the nervous system registers something important. Too much access, not from danger, from depth. And the response is immediate, but silent. The system does not say, I feel overwhelmed. It does not explain, I need space. It regulates. Automatically, the wall forms. And from that moment, the interaction changes. Not externally at first. Internally, the avoidant becomes more aware of themselves, more contained, more measured. They start filtering what they say, reducing what they reveal, keeping conversations within safer limits. Because depth now feels risky, not because of you, because of what depth activates inside them. Another trigger is emotional expectation, not spoken, felt. A shift in tone, a subtle increase in emotional reliance, the sense that the connection is becoming important, that it matters, that it could become something real. For many people, this creates security. For the avoidance system, it creates weight, responsibility, presence that must be sustained. And that's where the system reacts again. Not by leaving, by limiting. The wall appears to reduce how much is required, how much is expected, how much is felt. Consistency can also trigger the wall. Not inconsistency, not chaos. Consistency, regular communication, predictable presence, emotional availability that doesn't fluctuate. At first, this feels calming, safe, but over time, the nervous system begins to interpret it differently. It becomes structure, something stable, something real. And stability means the connection is no longer optional in the same way. It exists, it continues, it builds. And that continuity can create pressure inside the avoidance system. So again, the response is subtle, less depth, less emotional engagement, a quiet shift back into distance. There is also a more invisible trigger, internal activation, moments when the avoidant starts feeling more than they expected, not negative emotions, positive ones, attachment, care, connection, the realization that this person matters, that they could lose them, that the bond is becoming real. And this is where the wall can appear the fastest, because emotional attachment introduces vulnerability, and vulnerability means dependency could follow. So the system intervenes before that depth fully forms. It creates space, it lowers intensity, it builds the wall. From the outside, these triggers are almost impossible to detect because they are not about what you did wrong. They are about what the connection became closer, more real, more emotionally significant. And that is exactly what the avoidance system is trying to regulate, not by destroying the connection, but by controlling its depth. And this is why the wall feels so confusing, because it appears at the very moment everything seems to be going well, when the bond is deepening, when trust is increasing, when connection is becoming real. That is when the system says, this is enough, and creates distance, not to reject you, but to reduce internal pressure. Understanding this changes the meaning of that moment. The wall is not a sign that something failed. It is a sign that something became significant enough to trigger regulation. And the more you see that, the more clearly you begin to understand what is really happening beneath the surface. Once the wall appears, everything becomes subtle. Nothing breaks, nothing ends, but something changes in the tone. You feel it before you understand it. Responses are still there, but they feel lighter, shorter, less invested. The emotional weight is gone. Not completely, just reduced. Conversations stay on the surface. Safe topics, neutral energy, nothing too deep, nothing too revealing. And if you try to go deeper, you feel resistance. Not direct, not verbal, but present, like something gently redirects the moment. This is where most people react. Because the shift creates uncertainty. You start wondering, did something change? Did I do something wrong? Why does this feel different? And that uncertainty creates movement. You lean in, ask more questions, try to reconnect the depth, try to bring back what was there before. But here's what happens. On the other side, the more you reach, the more the system feels pressure. Not from you, from the increased intensity, from the attempt to reopen depth. And pressure strengthens the wall. So the avoidant adjusts again. Slightly more distance, slightly more delay, slightly more space. Not to punish you, to stabilize themselves. Because now, two things are happening at the same time. You're trying to reconnect. They're trying to regulate. And those two movements pull in opposite directions. This creates a quiet loop. You feel distance. You move closer. They feel pressure. They move back. You feel more distance. You try harder. They withdraw more. Not dramatically, gradually, subtly, until the connection feels completely different from what it was. This is the moment many people misinterpret. They assume the feelings are gone, but often the feelings are exactly what triggered the wall in the first place. It wasn't absence, it was activation. Too much meaning, too much closeness, too much internal response. So the system did what it learned to do: contain it. Inside the avoidant, something else is happening. They are aware of the shift, but not always able to explain it. They may feel, I just need space. I don't know why. This feels like a lot. I don't want to lose this, but I also don't want to feel this much. So instead of explaining, they reduce, they simplify, they make the interaction easier to manage, less emotional, less intense, more controlled. And this is where the invisible wall does its real function. It allows connection without exposure. It allows presence without vulnerability. It allows interaction without emotional risk. From the outside, it feels like distance. From the inside, it feels like relief. Because the system is no longer overwhelmed. It's back, within a tolerable range. But there is a cost. The depth that once existed cannot fully return while the wall is active, because depth requires openness, and openness is exactly what the wall limits. So the connection enters a different state. Not broken, not gone, but restricted. And this is why so many people feel stuck. Because the relationship still exists, but not in the same way. Understanding this moment is critical, because what you do here either stabilizes the dynamic or intensifies the distance. If you chase the depth, the wall strengthens. If you try to force clarity, the system closes more. If you push for emotional reassurance, the avoidant feels more pressure. But if you recognize what's actually happening, something shifts. You stop reacting to the surface change and start understanding the underlying pattern. This is not a communication failure. It's a regulation loop, a nervous system trying to manage how much closeness it can tolerate. And once you see that clearly, You stop trying to break through the wall and start seeing why it exists. In the first place, the most important thing to understand about the wall is this: you cannot remove it from the outside. You cannot explain it away. You cannot love through it. You cannot prove you're safe enough for it to disappear, because the wall was never built in response to you. It was built to regulate what happens inside them, and that changes how you move. Because most people try to solve the wall by increasing effort, more reassurance, more patience, more emotional presence, hoping that consistency will slowly soften the barrier. But the avoidance system doesn't interpret that as safety. It often interprets it as increased intensity, more closeness, more exposure, more pressure to stay open. And pressure doesn't dissolve the wall, it reinforces it. So the shift is not in what you give, it's in what you stop doing. You stop chasing the depth. You stop trying to recreate the previous intensity. You stop reaching for the version of them that existed before the wall appeared, because that version was present under different conditions, before the system felt overwhelmed, before the need for regulation increased. Instead, you become something the avoidance system rarely encounters: emotionally self-contained, present, without pulling, open, without demanding, engaged, without increasing pressure. And this changes the dynamic completely, because now the system no longer feels something pushing against it. It feels space, and space does something powerful. It lowers activation. It reduces pressure. It allows the nervous system to settle without needing to build stronger defenses. Over time, this can soften the wall, not because you forced it, because the system no longer needs it at the same intensity, because the environment feels less overwhelming, less demanding, less emotionally loaded. And in that environment, something subtle can happen. The avoidant may begin to open again, gradually, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small ways. A little more presence, a little more depth, a little more access. Not because you broke the wall, because the wall became less necessary. But here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. Sometimes, the wall doesn't come down, not because you did something wrong, but because that is the level of closeness their system can currently tolerate. And this is where your clarity matters most. Because understanding the psychology is powerful, but staying in a dynamic that cannot meet you is something else entirely. This is the real shift. You stop asking, "How do I get past the wall?" and start asking, "Is this the level of connection I'm willing to live in?" Because once you see the wall clearly, you also see its limits, what it allows, what it blocks, what it makes possible, and what it quietly prevents. Depth, consistency, emotional availability at the level you might actually need. And that awareness creates power, not control over them. Clarity within yourself. You stop personalizing their distance. You stop chasing their openness. You stop trying to solve what was never yours to fix. And instead, you become grounded in your own emotional position. What you want, what you accept, what you no longer negotiate with. Because the strongest position in any connection is not the one who tries the hardest. It's the one who sees the dynamic clearly and chooses accordingly. If this changed how you understand avoidant behavior, then you're starting to see something deeper. Not just what they do, but why it happens. The hidden patterns, the nervous system responses, the invisible mechanisms that shape connection without being spoken. And that is exactly what we explore here on the Inner Odyssey: the psychology behind emotional distance, the patterns most people feel, but can't explain. The dynamics that keep repeating until you finally see them clearly. So if you want to understand relationships at this level, subscribe to the inner Odyssey. Because once you can see the invisible patterns, you stop getting pulled into confusion and you start moving with clarity.